Welcome to the Hot Seat, where we go behind the scenes of the biggest shows in television and break down how they're actually made. Today, we're sitting down with Bengt Anderson from National Geographic to unpack Limitless, the Chris Hemsworth series. This isn't just another show, it's a blueprint for how high-level unscripted television gets made. If you like this kind of content, hit that subscribe button. Now let's get to the episode.
Hello, Bengt. Welcome to the Hot Sheet.
Thanks for having me, you guys. How's everything?
I was very excited to talk to you about this because your show Limitless on Nat Geo kind of fits into a special category, a genre of its own, sort of this like knowledge-tainment, where not only do you get to see Thor, the Marvel character in the flesh, literally without a shirt off half the time, which is nice, doing all these fun adventure things, but you also get to take a deep dive into science and learn about how to age well and live longer. And that to me is like, what's not to like?
Yeah. It's really, the whole idea for Limitless really came to us from Darren Aronofsky, who most folks know is, big Hollywood director. He and his partner at Protozoa, Ari Handel, we'd been working with them on a couple of deep dive science projects, including One Strange Rock with Will Smith. And they came to us and had expressed a real interest in, or a real fascination in the science of longevity. What is on the cutting edge of sort of human knowledge, both medically and just intellectually or academically, on how people live longer? Like, what do you need to do? What are the various sciences in one of their various buckets? It's a topic that a brand like National Geographic can sink our teeth into. As I said, coming off the heels of something like One Strange Rock, which was kind of a mashup of earth science, take like big blue chip earth science, and then make all these really amazing connections between organisms and the planet and so on, but then graft in Will Smith, who sat down as kind of a big blockbuster Hollywood A-lister. And this was probably, I want to say it was 2018, 2019. And you wouldn't think like Will Smith in a big blue chip science show would totally work. You'd feel like he was kind of grafted on or bolted onto it. But it was really for us the beginning of recognizing A-listers have deeper and wider, more varied interests than just being actors. Yeah. And, Will Smith in particular, and I'm going kind of far out really quickly to make a connection back for longevity in the start of Limitless, but Will Smith had always said to us in the background, I was at a crossroads in my life. If I hadn't hit it big as a pop star, I wanted to become a scientist.
Oh, wow. I had no idea.
He's even said, he's like, I was a failed scientist and a successful pop star. Great listener. And one of the more senior executives at Fox, and this is sort of right around the Fox and Disney transition for National Geographic, was like, hey, we really love like an A-list storyteller involved in this project. And on first blush, everybody had said, hey, Will Smith is really great for this, partially because of Independence Day. So there was like a space connection. But then underneath it all, as we got to know him, he's really curious and really into science. And so anyway, that started sort of all of our brains thinking like, there's the power of the A-lister, which draws an audience. And then the power of what National Geographic does, which is to bring context and depth and curiosity and just big, beautiful execution of content to the table and marrying those things up. And so our partnership with Darren Aronofsky and Ari Handel really began to bear fruit in the direction of longevity science. And so our team started to dig in, and eventually we arrived to Thor and Chris Hemsworth to get Limitless put together. So
yeah, it was really amazing. The very first shot of this whole series is movie star Chris Hemsworth on top of the tallest building in Sydney, Australia. And you're like, what the hell is he doing up there? And it just pulls you in from the very first shot. And it was, yeah, it was really cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think he's such an interesting choice of character for a show like this too, because for one, I mean, he's practically almost perfect already. And now he's gonna live forever and be perfect. So it says something interesting about us too, because these type of shows that are kind of experimental, like we're gonna throw you, fish out of water type of thing, it's usually somebody who's truly fish out of water, like, so you have this big reaction, but he's, this physical specimen doing all these physical challenges. And it kind of, to me as an athlete, that means you're elevating it even more. Like you're kind of going for this extreme version of perfection and limitless, being limitless. And
Yeah.
and that to me is super interesting.
I have to say, I had a very different reaction to that when I was first brought on to the project. And I mean no disrespect to Chris or any of the folks that had worked really hard to cast and start to put him together. I had a really big question because I hadn't spent any meaningful time as a consumer in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? A little bit, I had seen Iron Man, I had seen, maybe I don't even think I'd seen an Avengers movie, but I'd seen Iron Man, let's just say that. And so I was like, Chris Hemsworth, he's, really good looking, he's really successful, but I we need to figure out how to get the average audience to look beyond that and understand why they should care that he wants to live forever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it
Yeah,
seems like
yeah.
I mean, listen, I want everybody to be able to live as long and healthy lives as humanly possible. I mean, again, no disrespect to Chris and that whole team, but I was like, we've got a big hurdle there because seemingly this guy's got it all. So what do we do?
Right.
What do we
Who do
do?
you go from there?
And how do we get people to really connect to that? And as we started to dig into the topics that we were going to be covering across, we've done 2 seasons now. The first season we had 6 episodes, and we started to dig into the topics that were effectively, what are the things that you can do in your life to enhance your life or to live longer, and what are the things that you can actually remove from your life or attend to in your life that can help you live longer, like stress, eating better, and working on your memory, and then of course, ironically at the end, instead of fighting death, accepting the fact that we do have a temporary lifespan.
Right.
But as we began to dig into those various topics, like that first one, Sean, the very first episode, rather, sorry, is stress and how to attend to stress. And so just bringing Chris into that equation, we had started to map out with the production teams what kinds of things, if Chris were to kind of guinea pig himself into a big show where he's going to do some pretty bombastic, very TV ready, or almost stunts. How do we root those in science, A? And how do we, B, give Chris a real experience so that he doesn't have to go in there and pretend and perform? We can
Right.
kind of
Right.
build the
Right.
sandbox for him to go in, and then
Yeah.
he gets to play and just be himself. And so all of those puzzle pieces were coming together. We were wrapping our heads around, how to create a show that has entertainment and deep kind of layered value, factual information and science and so on, that contextualizes, there's enough context in there to make it sit nicely on National Geographic. But it wasn't until Chris sat down in his master interview and, we shot it dead center. He's looking straight down the lens.
Yeah.
And somebody starts to ask him questions about, like, hey, do you get stressed? Or what does stress mean to you? And Chris sat there, and you see it. It's like the first, few seconds of the show. And he just took the question in, and he began to respond in a very real, very grounded, very honest way that he deals with stress just like we do,
Yeah.
just like you and me at different levels, different things. But he talks about his kids. He talks about sleep. He talks about his sort of monkey brain of waking up in the middle of the night with the to-do lists and all those things. And then suddenly I was like, oh, of course. He's a human just like the rest of us at a little bit of a different level. But the human side of this is that stress will kill you.
Yeah.
So Chris is now going on a journey that by opening himself up to us and sharing and being vulnerable and real and telling us those stories, I was like, oh God, I totally buy this guy. I really buy him. He was real. And I will always thank him for just surrendering to that experience, because it's really ballsy for somebody
it
to
is.
go and do like
Incredible
that.
what he did
Yeah.
there. I mean, you watch all those episodes, even the last episode in season 2 that's out. I don't know if there's more coming, but the climbing the wall in Switzerland. I mean, I'm not a fan of heights. And it doesn't sound like he is either, which is even more amazing. He's not a big fan of heights either. And for him to like just go through the process and go up that wall, it's amazing. It's truly
But
amazing.
hats off to all you guys who, and to Chris for doing it, because he does seem genuinely invested, and curious. And he was Chris. He wasn't
That's right.
Thor, the actor, or anything. It was, this big celebrity guy, um, you know, but it was him. It was actually him going through these experiences and like you said, surrendering to the process, which is phenomenal. So you do believe it, and you get past that he's, this Thor and good looking, and you're with him on the journey. And
Yeah.
and that, I thought that was excellent, because I think, choosing a celebrity to be in the show is always a mixed bag. Like, it's like, yes, it attracts the attention, but is this the right fit? It's not always a solution to the problem.
Well,
to
also a
show.
star, also a star like him, and that carries a massive franchise, billion-dollar franchise. And like if Thor, because that's how the world sees him, can't complete this challenge, what does that do to the franchise? I mean, I'm sure there's internal discussions about that. I mean, how does Nat Geo? I mean, I know the relationship there. Maybe you can explain it to our audience. Like, how do you get Mr. Marvel to come over? Like, is it part of the Disney family thing? Does that help? I
I mean,
mean,
how did we cast him?
how do you get? How does Marvel let him do this? I guess is the question.
It's a really good question. Chris is independent. He can do whatever he wants to. We definitely, when we start to work with, we've got another project right now with Tom Hiddleston, so with Loki.
Oh yeah.
And along the way, we're able to develop those projects, engage with the A-lister about those projects, all those ideas, and get them on board. And then at some point, I don't really know when exactly along the way, but we will do a gut check with Marvel just to FYI them into what we're doing.
Oh, that's
If
cool.
there's any kind of issues or crossover, or in season 2 of Limitless, we definitely had to work around Avengers shooting schedule.
Oh.
So there were times where they had, we're trying to make a show and we're on a ticking clock. As soon as you spool up a production, you've got staff and teams, you got a budget and a schedule and everything. The clock is starting to tick, and we're all just waiting because Marvel basically had like a hold on Chris's schedule for a couple of months because they were working on syncing up. I don't know what's in the Avengers, but I know Chris is a part of it. And there were periods where we were like, you guys, we just need a day with Chris to go climb a giant dam in Switzerland. And there's a little bit of that just production back and forth of like, when can we get him? And can he do this kind of big, scary, dangerous thing or not? We were never going to put him in extreme harm's way because we do all kinds of safety and due diligence. And
Sure. Yeah.
there's a giant internal process where we effectively go through all the risk management and insurance, and we pressure test all of these things. We've got experts up the wazoo who are ready to support. And as you can see, none of it's hidden either. You know, Chris walking across that crane on top of the tower in Sydney, he's got wires all over him. I mean, he's safety to the nines, but it's still scary as all get
Oh,
out.
it's
And
incredible.
that's
Scary.
the point, really.
Yeah.
It's not will he or won't he fall. It's just put a human,
Yeah.
however many meters up in the sky, who doesn't do that kind of thing, and see if they can conquer their fear response and manage their stress. That's the exploration.
Yeah.
But back to the getting Marvel's permission or Disney's permission or so on. It's really more of a gut check. If they're actively engaged in, say, filming for, say, the Avengers got a lock on that person. And, we're really in second position to something like that. It's a giant franchise. We all get it. That's just how it all works. But because the celebs are, Chris in particular in this instance, really engaged in this show, really engaged in this experience, gave us quite a bit of time.
I think it helped. I mean, in my personal opinion, I think it helped Marvel because I'm not a Marvel person, but I really enjoyed this show. So now I'd be more interested in seeing the Avengers.
Yeah, it's funny. I ended up watching because we started pre-production for Limitless before the pandemic.
Wow.
And then we rolled into the pandemic and things slowed down. We were still doing pre-production and kind of writing and research in those phases and so on. And because I was working on a project with Chris Hemsworth and I hadn't really seen the Marvel movies, Disney Plus had just launched. And so I sat down. I was like, well, I guess I'll buy myself like a little home theater. I bought a nice TV and the surround sound speakers and set up a nice screening room down in my basement. And one day I was just like, I got time. And so they've got all the Marvel movies in timeline order. And
Oh,
I started
wow.
at the very first one, which is Captain America. And I literally spent probably 4 or 5 months watching all the movies back to back to back to back. And it was so pleasurable. It was so pleasurable. And by the
That's
end, I was
fun.
like, fucking cool. Like I'm working with Thor. Super fan. It was cool.
Yeah.
But they were, for production of Limitless in particular, he was not, I don't believe he was filming anything with Avengers during that time. So he was pretty free. I mean, he was busy, but he was free for a couple of days per episode across the course of a handful of months.
I'm curious about, you mentioned Darren Aronofsky. This was his idea to do a show on longevity. What is his science background and interest in longevity, and what did he ultimately want to do? And did these stress tests and stuff come from him, or who did all that come from?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't want to speak. I don't want to speak for Darren in particular. Everybody at Protozoa, they're a really intellectual bunch. They're academically really curious. I believe, and Ari, if you're listening, I apologize if I butcher this, but Ari is a trained neuroscientist.
Oh, okay.
And so they're really intellectually rigorous, curious, and so on. And my understanding is that Darren's got a real interest in. I mean, we all do. We've got a real interest in how to live a longer, better, healthier life, and that there is cutting edge science out there, and that's an area where they express a lot of interest uh, in their own lives, and thought, hey, this could translate into a TV show by bringing some of the world's foremost scientists on the cutting edge of longevity science, whether it's fasting or contrast therapies or stress, etc., bringing them to the table and creating, uh, sort of experiential, immersive, science-rooted project like Limitless. So,
So how did you guys come up with the
well,
ideas? Because there's out of the two seasons, sorry, there's like 9 episodes: stress, shock, fasting, strength, memory, acceptance, brain power, risk, and pain.
yeah.
How did the teams come up with those topics, and how did you match the scientist and then the drill?
The makeup of the entire production was Newtopia, who's the production company. based out of the UK. We're partners with Darren and Protozoa. Once we started to really move into meaningful development around the idea, Utopia and their development department would work along with probably Darren and Ari around some of the big sort of topic buckets. What are some of those zeitgeisty things? Things that, topics and buckets that that an audience would find really interesting or were already kind of buzzing, like saunas and cold plunging.
Right.
I was
Right.
like, I'd heard all about those things. I didn't know any of the science behind them. And
Right.
so they were in the process of pitching a bunch or doing a bunch of research initially in the development phases and pitching a bunch of those zeitgeisty topics. And we just thought, hey, stress feels really approachable, really universal. Everybody deals with stress. That's a topic that is certainly a real killer. So they went out, they found real information out in the world to back up the topic, to back up the fact that if you can tame your stress, if you're really stressed, there's a higher propensity that you're going to suffer some kind of heart disease or some kind of medical impacts mentally. You're gonna wear yourself out, etc. And so they went out and just pressure tested the topics against real world research, and came back and were like, there is ample information out here, loads of experts out in the world who can speak to these things. And then it was like, okay, so we've got the research and to prove this out. How do you take all that information? Because some of it's really dense, really academic, really kind of medical, and not very accessible to the every person. But that's what we do in TV, isn't it? I mean, we tend to, whether I'm working at National Geographic or as a freelancer, I've often found my job is to parachute into somebody's life as an expert or just a real life individual and figure out who they are, what do they do, how can I find a way to work with them to honor what they do, but translate those ideas to a big, broad audience in an interesting and bite-sized and or entertaining kind of fashion. So that was the next task that we had to do, was take all of this phenomenal research that the teams had done and figure out how do we then take all these ingredients, that research, a super celebrity, and what are we going to do to give that person a really interesting experience, immerse them, and give the audience a big piece of entertainment to boot.
Excellent job just explaining that, because it's a lot of things that come together. And TV is, you have to see it in action. I think that's the difference. Like science, you can read it and dive into it, and then TV kind of gives it that 3D dimensional type of thing where it's action oriented. So
Yeah.
what does that science look like in the form of action with an action hero? And I
Yeah.
think the tasks were really fun. The ice climb, like you mentioned, Sean, I think that Chris said that was the hardest thing he's ever done in his life. And so that was like a real test. Like there was no
Well,
bullshit there,
those were something that's something that Chris, not just the climb of that dam, but everything, every sort of final challenge that Chris was going to do in the show, he said, I want to do this for real,
Nice.
whatever it is. And we were like, awesome.
Dream. Yeah, that's great.
And sometimes he had time, like in the strength episode you saw, it doesn't sound that difficult, but to climb 100-meter rope, is it 100
dude,
meters? Not
crazy.
100 meters, 100-foot rope,
100-foot rope, yeah.
dangling from a cable car. Climbing a rope doesn't sound that hard, but it's super difficult. And so thankfully, he realized, he was like, when he first started climbing, he thought, I could just muscle my way up this thing. But he couldn't get there. He couldn't do it because it's very difficult. And it isn't just biceps and, your pecs or whatever. It requires a full sort of body type strength. And so he realized, oh my God, if I'm going to be successful, and he wanted to not only do it for real, but he wanted to be successful. He's a really competitive guy. And he didn't want to fail. We all told him, and you guys can really appreciate this, but when there's failure in anything, it shows a more human side to anything. So we were like, it's okay if you're not totally successful along the way. Like that's a great learning experience. And some of those conversations actually we had to have along the way, or the producers, especially out in the field with Chris, like climbing the rope and stuff, had to have along the way, which are like, Chris, it's okay to show your process, because it's really important that the audience understands that you're not just gonna be able to climb the hell out of this rope and get to the top from the very beginning. Because if you are, that's not a journey.
Yeah.
There's no learning. There's very little arc there, and so and the same thing with drumming for the first episode of season 2, where
Yeah.
Chris
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
learning how to drum. He sat down. I was in that room, or just in the next room over, and Chris sat down at that drum kit at Ed Sheeran's studio up in the UK, and you could tell the look on his face. You could see he was like, I really don't feel that comfortable back here. You can tell he'd never done it before. He's played music, as he said, but you could see as soon as he started to try to like syncopate or do differing rhythms on those drums, he hadn't done it before, and that sets up
Yeah, you can't fake that. You can't
you
fake
can't.
not playing the
No,
drums.
no. And so those like seeing his process, seeing failure along the way or struggle along the way opens up really amazing opportunity for not only growth but honesty and just learning and storytelling along the way.
I was gonna say it's also, I mean, like for him, I'm surprised he didn't become a rock star after that, because that instant gratification from the audience, it's like everybody says it's the most addictive drug there is, right? Like is
Yeah.
walking into a stadium like that.
Yeah, he basically, when he was done, he's like, I'm never gonna do that again. Never do that again. He had such a huge sigh of relief when he was done. It was you could tell that was extremely stressful.
Yeah.
Well, he said that was the most rewarding thing that he's ever done. And that is the message, right? Like if you challenge yourself and put yourself out of the comfort zone, that's where you learn. That's where you adapt. That's where
Yeah.
the good things about longevity sets in, and is putting yourself out of the zone and learning. And he said that the ice climbing was the hardest thing he's ever done, and the drumming was the funnest thing he's ever done. So,
Yeah.
that there's a joy in being uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's right. We really tried, and we weren't always successful, but when we were originally building out the show, we were trying to figure out how to show growth and how to demonstrate success at the end of every episode, not just like walking across the crane. And it came in a little bit later. The crane in the stress proof episode, which is episode 101 of season 1, the crane was a really interesting example because just walking across, turning around and coming back is one form of success. But how do you measure that Chris has done the work and been able to deploy the various methods or means that he learned along the way to sort of confront stress, to manage stress, to do the breathing and the kind of centering and all the various things that he was meant to learn. And so somewhere a little bit later in the process, the team came to us and were like, there's this vest that you can wear, and it does all these biometric measurements. It'll measure your heart rate, your blood, anyway, it just does all these, your breathing. It can do all these measurements and so on. And that's when they were like, we all discussed, we should set a baseline. So the audience can see, let's put them in a mock version of, the crane walk. And that's where the VR idea came to. Put them in a mock version of that, but put them in that vest and get some basic metrics, so that when he gets to the end and he's gone through all of the learnings in and around stress, and again, all the techniques and things that he can deploy, we can see him up there really stressed at the very beginning. And there's something visual that you get to look at. How do we translate success to the audience, or a sense that Chris has been successful sort of taming his stress? So you can see the metrics on screen. That was a really important component in how to translate some of these complicated ideas for a big, broad audience is sometimes you just got to see
Yeah.
that he's taken his insanely high heart rate because he's hundreds and hundreds of feet off the ground, and he's calmed himself
That's
and he's having
amazing.
success through it. So
That's
anyway,
awesome.
that was another layer of storytelling that we kind of had to figure out because all these things came to fruition. We had Thor. One of the producers, this guy Greg, had been going out and scouting all these different things that Chris could do. We had talked about tightrope walking. We had talked about climbing a cliff at some point. And then they came back at one point and they pitched us this idea. This is the Newtopia production team. They pitched us this idea. They were like, I guess, driving around Sydney, and they looked up and they saw this crane on top of the Crown. I think it's called the Crown Sydney. And they pitched us that idea. And we're like, oh my God, that's phenomenal. we have to do that. So all these little puzzle pieces came together and it started to become this really giant kind of supersized idea. But for something that was happening inside of Chris, how we had to ask ourselves, how do we demonstrate to the audience that Chris has learned and is successful in this? And so that vest and the biometric sort of graphic indicator on the screen, it's all real and real time captured, but that really kind of added in that right layer to demonstrate that he had done the work.
Yeah. It was really, really scary to watch. For our audience though, can you explain like that process of planning a show like this? Like who has the final say in what stunts actually you're going to do and that are going to make it on air? Like
Yeah, it's a
who chooses that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So contextually speaking, we're, I'm going to start really wide and I'll go in
Yeah.
and make it kind of bite-sized if I can. We are National Geographic. I run the unscripted production team. We've got 3 different production teams who make, effectively TV and documentaries. We've got our natural history team. We've got our feature docs team and the unscripted team, and I oversee that group. And it's a group of probably about 5 to 6 executive producers and so on. When somebody like Darren Aronofsky and or Newtopia or pick a production company comes and pitches us an idea, and we say, we love that idea, here's X million dollars to go make that idea. They then go away and we assign internally an executive producer to work with them through the entire process from green light all the way until the delivery of that show, right? So that's the basics. So for something like Limitless, that show gets greenlit, and then effectively the production company, the people who are going to execute the actual producing of the TV show, the organizing of the production management, all the people and the cameras and the sound and the travel and the edits and all of those kinds of things was Newtopia. And what they did is they basically hire a group of creative producers, much like us, Jen and I in particular, Sean, we've never worked together, but many years ago we were freelance producers. We would get the
Yeah.
call and say, do you want to come interview for a show all about longevity science and, doing X, Y, and Z? And we'd be like, hell yes, that sounds great. We come into a room and we get going doing the research to figure out what would an episode around stress kind of look like. So Newtopia starts that process. And along the way, periodically, they bring us, whether it's casting or outlines for ideas or, pitch decks that are like, hey, this is an episode about stress. How do we stress Chris Hemsworth out? safely, or how do we demonstrate stress in a really interesting kind of big blockbuster kind of way, and challenge Chris in a really interesting way. And in this particular case, it's like, how do we put Chris under stress, and then eventually be able to measure it and follow and teach him rather how to overcome those various stresses or stresses in life and so on. And so, to your question, there are regular kind of check-ins from the production company over to the network, usually maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks. And as the creative comes to fruition, they're presenting different forms of creative to the network. We read it, we feedback. Sometimes we feedback editorial notes, which are just responding to whatever they've written. Like, we understand this or we don't understand this, or let's talk about that's the scenes, or who knows what, who's
Yeah.
involved in these scenes. What are we actually trying to make in this scene, and so on. And so when it came to the final challenges for Chris, um, the partners, which is at this point Protozoa, which is Aronofsky and his team, Newtopia, and then Chris's team, Wild State
Wow, that's nice.
Productions. They all get together initially, and they're having their own conversations internally, and getting in line with like, hey, these are some really interesting ideas for like a big stunt. Let's present it to the network. So they then presented to, I was one of two executive producers on Limitless. They presented to us, and sometimes it's in just like a deck form, like a 6 or 5 or however many pages deck.
Yeah.
And there's maybe 4 or 5 or 6 different options. Does he climb a giant radio tower? Does he walk across the top of a building on a crane? Does he climb a giant dam? Does he hold his breath, and free dive to try to catch his meal after fasting for 4 days, with no energy in his system? And if he gets a fish, that's his first meal so they pitch us those ideas. And, I've made a lot of TV and a lot of projects in my life. And the ones that really pop, you can kind of just tell.
Yeah.
You're
Oh,
like,
yeah.
that would be killer. I understand this episode is intending to do and wanting to do. And sometimes, actually more often than not, if you know what the ending is going to be, then it's easier to chart your path to get there. So,
Right.
they're like, let's have him, get to the top of this tower, walk across this crane, and try to keep his heart rate low. And we're like, that's wild. And they're going to shoot the pants out of it. They're
That's a
going to get
good one.
helicopters in the air. They have cameras all over the place. And he's going to be wearing this, this vest that's testing his biometrics the whole time. We're like, okay, cool. We've got our ending.
Yeah.
Now let's chart our way to get there.
Yeah.
So
I
we,
love
sorry, in a nutshell. So the partners in the production company, and of course Chris would have to be on board for a lot of those things. They get together, present to us at the network, because we're, in a nutshell, we're the client. We're the ones who are like, here's X million bucks to make something for us. And the executive producers, who, me and my team, we're the ones who are like, effectively sort of the filters and or the brand. Like, what do we need in our stories to make it a rich, interesting and entertaining story that fits and belongs on National Geographic? So that's a little bit of the conversation and dance that we've got to do. But in the end, I'll hear the pitch for the biggest stunts and stuff, and then I'll bring the ones that we think are the best up to even my bosses and say, we want to do this, this, or this. And they're like, we love this also. Now see if that's possible. Logistically, insurance, with all the insurance,
Right.
all those kinds of things. So really the network does have kind of the final decision, but then there's a whole lot of hurdles to actually being able to pull it off and execute it too. So
That was a great explanation. It's funny
Yeah.
because I've worked in this business so long, but I've never really heard that explanation, like we just do it, but it's nice to hear the explanation. Like, this is the flow. This is how it happens. This is how it works. And, I think when people watch shows, they don't realize there's a production company involved and then the network involved, and those two entities work in tandem to come up with the best ideas, given the budget and the other constraints, and, managing Marvel's time frame and all these other things. But that's a really great way to explain it. And it must have been really fun for the producers on this show to come up with all these like really fun ideas. That's always my favorite part, is coming up with like, how do we stress Chris out? Like, what do we do? And being the puppet masters of, creating these things. But
some of the
that's really neat.
team on this show in particular had spent years working on Top Gear in the UK. And
Okay.
Top Gear, for people who have never seen it, they've probably heard of it. There was a US version as well, but a hugely successful show in the UK that was on the BBC. 3 hosts, and every episode they're doing something insane with cars. And it was kind of a three guys get together and have a nostalgic sort of trip down memory lane via vehicles. But then they would go doing like crazy things with those vehicles. They would race them or try to drive them up a dam, or they would, crash, like have a crash up derby. Or I'm not even doing it justice because I haven't seen it nearly as much. But what I'm ultimately saying is that so many of the producers, or a number of the producers that worked on Limitless, had come from a background of needing to do very challenging, relatively dangerous logistical things. And so and then having to be kind of weird and creative in the mix of all that too.
Yeah.
So they brought together a really interesting mashup of background and experience, which is, let's think wild and entertaining for TV, but also let's think about the how. Like, how are we going to pull this thing off? And not only just how are we going to pull this thing off, but how can we pull it off as safely as humanly possible, while still maintaining that sort of electric middle ground of it's still risky. And so the person at the heart of it, whether they're driving the car or walking across the crane like Chris did, there's still an element of this is a little dangerous still, but it's real. So that team was amazing because they kept just pushing
That's so
it
fun.
and bringing great ideas to the table for us.
But talking about perceived risk versus actual risk.
Mm.
And how do you measure that? And what is that line? What's that line for Nat Geo or for you?
Now, perceived versus actual risk, and when do you bite, when do you not bite? What's the calculation there? I think there's a pretty interesting and broad spectrum, right? One is, and let's take Alex Honnold, for example, and I can bring it back to Limitless too, because Limitless is a little more of a contained, we're going to make this thing for TV.
Yeah.
Chris wouldn't be doing these things naturally. Yeah. Whereas Alex, for example, his climb of Yosemite, or climb of Capitan in Yosemite, he was going to do that anyway. Like, that was something he was doing, and Jimmy Chin and the whole team brought that project. I was peripherally, or I was at Nat Geo then, but I wasn't a part of that project. I was sort of one step removed from it, but they brought that project to us. And, behind closed doors, everybody was like, what if he falls? Like, this guy could die. He's doing it without a rope. That's unbelievable. And it's insane. Yeah. And basically the conversations were like, Jimmy Chin was basically like, this guy's my buddy. And we've been filming with him as a documentary, and he's going to do it. I want to, I think this is something that we're just going to continue filming it. Do you guys want to participate and be there? And so, that part of the calculation there is like, okay, that guy was going to do it anyway. They're going to document this. And it was a big risk, certainly for the senior executive teams, even at Fox, to just buy in to something like that. Cause it's, there's a real question around, by funding the filming of it, does that put added pressure on to somebody like Alex to feel like he's got to do it?
Right.
Do you know what I mean? And so
yeah,
there's that relationship that starts to potentially get a little bit murky. But if I'm going to say perceived versus actual, one end of the spectrum is, especially for National Geographic, is there are people out in the world doing amazing things, experts in their various fields, who are going to go climb Mount Everest, or they're going to sail on the high seas and sail the Northwest Passage, or they're going to sail out in the center of the Atlantic Ocean to go to, a volcano that nobody's ever climbed before, because they've seen from the satellite images that there's like an open caldera and it might be a lava lake, and nobody's ever gone and climbed this thing. It could be the 7th in the world. It's a real discovery. We can get behind that. That's somebody who's like, we're pushing further and further to understand the planet. We're deeply curious. We're volcanologists and we're specialists. We can get behind that easily. And of course, in the process of saying, here's, $1 million or whatever number, we're going to go through all the checks and balances to ensure that they're doing it safely. And they've got all the right experts in the right places, and their plans feel sound. That's part of our job also, is to ensure that we feel really good about who they are and what they're going to do. And so often we're working with the world's foremost experts.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
who do you call? You just call another expert who's like, that's Alex Honnold or that's Jimmy Chin. Like, I can check his work and I will check Alex Honnold, you know? So that's one part. And then there's what Al is talking about with climbing the tower. That's a made for TV experience. And that also translates to Limitless too, where, Chris or Alex in that instance, climbing the building, wouldn't necessarily be doing that because or naturally.
Yeah.
They're coming to the table to participate in a filmed TV experience. And so your metric for real risk or actual risk and perceived risk, I think those things get a little bit tighter and there's a lot more scrutiny around those things. The productions, really have to put in hours, hundreds of hours of due diligence to ensure those things are going to be safe. I'll give you a great example. Actually, I executive produced, and we produced Do Not Attempt with David Blaine.
Oh yeah. Watch
and
that.
if you've never seen that show, check out the first, the first, the second, the third, all the episodes. David is doing unbelievably insane things.
Oh, yeah, it is.
In the second episode in particular, and I got to tell you, these conversations were like, people looked at me like, you're an insane person.
Yeah.
David Blaine was like, I want to kick a king cobra. And we were like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, there's this guy in Indonesia and he gets he saves these king cobras, from zoos or, they invade, somebody's home and he'll go and save them and put them in a box and then he's going to release them. But along the way, he works with them and gets to know them and he performs with them. And he's like, I want to go spend time with that guy. And I'm afraid of snakes and I don't want to get bitten and I don't want to die, but I think there's something really fucking cool there, and that's magical. And so we had to work with the production team. They were like, okay, so David wants to work with somebody who works with snakes and then kiss a king cobra on the head. And our first questions are like, is it defanged? Is it a wild cobra? Could this kill him? And the answer was yes. And so we have to go in and say, okay, what questions do we have? And so we actually think about it. We say, okay, this is something that David, our talent, really wants to do and might even do on his own if we weren't there, just to kind of bring that into the mix. This is David. What are they going to do to get him the training? Who's the expert? And what are the safety measures that are being put into place? Can somebody who's bit by a king cobra survive? Is there anti-venom around? Where's the nearest hospital? What kind of medical team are you going to have on standby? What other mitigation are you going to put into place? Both where the camera's going to be, where the distractions, how is this all going to go down? And so that was real risk, all the way there. But what we did is with our team at Nat Geo, with the Disney risk safety and risk teams and all the lawyers and the insurance companies and so on, with the production team and with David, we worked diligently with them to understand his process, to understand. We actually shifted the shoot from Indonesia to Thailand because in Indonesia, they didn't have the anti-venom.
Oh, wow.
But in Bangkok, I believe they shot in Bangkok for that final scene. I apologize if I'm getting that wrong, but there was a entomologist doctor who had administered anti-venom to a number of people successfully at a local hospital. And so they engaged that individual, spoke to that individual, made sure that there was anti-venom that was up to date, multiple hits of it, hits, I don't know what you call it, but multiple inoculations of it, injections of it on hand. at the hospital that day, and the hospital was on alert that we were doing that. We had an ambulance on standby, and that doctor, we made sure that that doctor was working that day. And I believe that doctor, I wasn't there on set. I believe that doctor was there on set.
Can
Also.
you can you imagine though, like working at Nat Geo, Jen? Like, listen to this. Like, this pitch would be amazing to do a live. Like, have David Blaine come in and pitch this live, like a YouTube live for us.
I mean, those
Even going on LinkedIn and finding a venomist. I mean, how many of those are on?
LinkedIn.
Those conversations alone, to pitch some of those things through on that show. David wants to, eat glass. He wants to light himself on fire and jump off of a bridge. He wants to he wants to cover himself in 250,000 bees. Perceived an actual risk. I guess the two sort of ends of the extreme there, because there's one is documentary, and is this person going to do this thing potentially regardless of cameras being
Right,
on?
right.
And are they an expert, right?
Yeah.
In that thing? If they're not an expert in that thing and they're going to go do something insane, the answer is probably going to be like, no way. Absolutely not. Like, let them go and live their lives.
Yeah.
We'd never probably touch it. If it were filmed, they brought it to us and, it had been successful, we'd still have to take a look at it and ask ourselves, are we, it might be remarkable, but in commissioning this or giving them a lot of money, are we supporting, the proliferation of this kind of behavior? We have to ask ourselves these kinds of questions along the way.
Somebody watching the hot sheet right now, how do they get insurance for something like this? Like, how do you insure this?
I mean, without being crass, you just pay a ton of money.
Yeah.
You really do.
I
You
bet.
can
I
probably
bet.
insure anything. Disney's got works with insurance providers, big longstanding relationships, giant policies, individual policies for individual shows and or instances. And there were things for Limitless season 2 in particular that we couldn't get insurance for.
Mm.
Wow.
And there are secondary markets where you can pay super premiums. I'm quoting pretend numbers here, but 50, 100 grand, or more just for a certain kind of insurance. And we were only going to be getting liability. You weren't even going to get like full coverage. And if
Wow.
you really think about Chris, who, nobody, just the simple fact that any individual, Chris or myself, or one of you could potentially die doing activity X, like that's, a real conversation that we've all just got to have. And then when you think about, ensuring that somebody like Chris has a significantly higher value,
Yeah.
both for himself as an individual, a caretaker, a provider, a businessman who's got, a production company, he's got other businesses that he's involved in. And then of course, as the character Thor, eventually the risk becomes potentially too great if Chris gets hurt or worse.
Yeah.
And so
Right. So you don't want
we
that.
just have
Yeah.
to, it's a lot of meetings and a lot of calculations and a lot of figuring out. Eventually at some point, the risk to benefit ratio, the risk outweighs the benefits of some of those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was the biggest surprise about Limitless? Like, for Chris, and you personally, like, what were the surprises that you guys learned throughout this fun journey?
In the making of Limitless, I hadn't really spent much time thinking about longevity, thinking about what it means to live a healthier, longer life. I was just kind of, living day to day and so on. But as we started to dig into all those zeitgeisty topics, the stress and the cold and hot plunges and the fasting and so on, what really surprised me was like I started to try those things myself, like where art kind of imitates life or the reverse, and almost not emulating what Chris is doing by any stretch, but applying some of those things to my life in really interesting and kind of profound ways. And one of the things we can talk more about that. There's some really cool things that have have sort of happened in my personal life and with my son and daughter and so on, inspired by the show. But one of the most surprising things about Limitless in particular is how impactful it's been to the audience.
Yeah.
People around the world not only watched the show and really loved the show, but actually started to alter their lives a bit. They started to
That's
take
amazing.
learning or explore. So the show had impact,
That's
I guess.
great.
And
Yeah.
and it's not that it was, jaw-droppingly surprising, but it feels so good to know that the show had an impact on people and people were taking a real look at like, well, how can I live my life differently to live better and healthier, and longer? And so that to me and to a lot of us at National Geographic and even to Chris has gotten an extraordinary amount of positive feedback about the show where people are like, I was overweight and sitting around on the couch all day. And I just decided nobody was going to do it for me. I needed to get up off the couch and I started running and I've lost 200 pounds and I feel better than I've ever done. And I'm running marathons or whatever it is,
Yeah, it's cool.
and
That's
kids,
great.
like kids just look, it's been
That's
really,
so great. That's
Like
amazing.
let me ask you guys real fast. I mean, longevity, aging, like, does it scare you? I mean, it scares the shit out of me. I could totally relate to Chris. I was like, I don't want to. I do the fasting. I do the ice plunges and all the things. But like, that's where I feel like the audience relates. I mean, do you two personally feel that way? Like you
Jen, what about you? You start. I've talked
Am
about it.
I afraid of
growing old, getting old, like
growing old? Well, I mean, I think you have to face it, right? We're all going to get old. Like that was Chris's revelation at the end.
yeah,
We all get old. You just have to, I think I personally, incorporate some of these things from the show as well. Like, I don't want to just get old. I want to have, a healthy, happy life. I want to be active until, the end of my days and then just fall, and then be done.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You want quality. I vote for quality of life, whatever that means to everybody.
Yeah.
And so that's what I strive for. I'm heavily committed to strength, some of these tenets that you guys practiced. I don't do the fasting. I don't love cold, but I do, I do like a cold ocean. I try and learn new things. Like this podcast is a new thing for us. So I think I do practice some of these things and try to challenge myself. I believe in challenging yourself as a form of adaptation. I do that mostly through strength training because it's hard. Olympic lifting requires a lot of brain power because it's so technical and you have to have true mastery of um, your body and mind because it's like strength, power, and speed kind of all combined. It's kind of the ultimate physical challenge, So that I find joy. But I'm not necessarily scared. I just want to do it well. I want to do it well. I think that's why
What
this is
what
such a
if
great conversation.
So let me ask you this, because this will dovetail into my thank you for speaking by the way first, because I had to think
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
But what if for some reason one day, you had to stop doing that? Physically, I don't know, hypothetically speaking, but physically something changed and you were not able to do that anymore because a doctor or somebody or you just sort of admit like, oh my God, my body is giving out.
Right.
I'm getting
Sure.
older. I'm now
Yeah.
confronted with my inability to do something, mechanical.
Yeah.
Uh,
No,
and it's
uh,
really confronting. It can be
Yeah.
it's a
really.
great question. But I think through
It's
the lessons of strength training, I feel like I've learned to adapt, right? So like that is like you're physically doing that by pushing hard out of your comfort zone, doing things and stressing the muscles so that they adapt. And I think that by doing that physically, it does help your brain adapt to change. So, if I'm not unable to do a snatch or a clean and jerk at some point. And there's a master's category. There are 8 peoples in their 80s doing this. So, but if say I don't want to do it anymore or I just can't or whatever, then I hope I adapt to the next thing, whatever that is that's challenging. Maybe it'll be puzzles or something.
Yeah.
My grandma lived till she was 94 and she played puzzles every day. So there you go. But
Yeah.
Banked, I want to hear your story because you're behind the scenes making all these decisions and talking to insurance companies and Marvel and making all this happen. But you had sounds like you had a personal experience with this particular show, and would love to hear about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and Sean, this dovetails a little bit to what you were asking.
Yeah, for sure.
First and foremost, I think nobody wants the lights to turn out. Very long time ago, an acceptance that life is finite and that's going to happen. I'm actually more afraid of losing other people. You know,
Yeah.
Yeah,
that
yeah,
that to me that's really difficult. I really empathize with people who, who've lost tons of friends throughout their lives. They've lived super long lives and they're just sort of ready to go because they've seen everybody kind of go. You
Yeah.
know, uh,
yeah,
so
yeah,
there's like a kind of a heavy poetic beauty in that. I think for me, in terms of I'm not super afraid of aging, but I am a little bit afraid of being physically or mentally depleted or challenged at some point.
yeah.
Um, Through this process of making Limitless, I suffered an injury to my knee, and uh, actually we bought a Peloton during that time, and so I was like, okay, maybe I'll
Oh,
rehab.
everybody bought a Peloton.
Everybody did, but it was really great because I could rehab on this Peloton, and I was really worried because if I wasn't able to do something physical, at least during the weeks, I was really going to struggle. And I never really kind of put all of that together. My need to be active wasn't just like a need to feel good physically, but it was actually affecting my mental health to not
Yeah.
to not be active. And so I adapted and found my way through that. Now, really, like 5 days a week, at the very least, I'm doing something physical, whether I go run, go to the gym, go ski, go for a big long hike or something to that effect. But Limitless was really inspirational for me because by getting immersed in all of these various topics, I was getting paid to go deep and to learn about these various topics, and it's sparked a lot of curiosity in me about my own ability to handle stress, some of the more zeitgeisty topics like cold and hot shock,
Yeah.
and in the pandemic I started to do a lot of these things. I tried fasting for a couple of days, and that was really, really interesting to recognize and to start to look at my relationship to food and
Yeah.
the 3 meals a day and like how much I was snacking or having a coffee or constantly kind of feeding myself and so on. And so removing food, I started to really look at my relationship to that. I live on a really cool little river outside the back of my house here, and I started cold plunging.
Oh,
Oh, that's
I'd
cool.
cool.
I'd go for like a run or
Where does cold plunging work? I mean, I go to Banya.
Excellent.
I do the Banya thing. So it's like the hot cold, but does it really work? What is the science behind that?
Sean, go for it. You
Oh no, I love it. I feel 20 years younger every time I do it. I absolutely
Really?
love it. Yeah. Yeah.
Huh.
I think, listen, I'm no scientist. I'm a TV producer
Yeah.
first and foremost, but again, from like people talk about your nervous system all the time and like sort of, calming your nervous system or getting in sort of managing your nervous system. Sauna to cold plunge, that contrast therapy, whenever I go and do it, I feel like I've either had an hour-long massage or I've had a killer sleep because I come out and I'm so chill and I feel really centered and I feel really clear also. So something is I'm having a very positive physical reaction, and I believe it's calming and doing something to my nervous system. And I also have noticed I've never really been somebody to get sick, but I don't get sick often at all. And I do attribute contrast therapy or my doing contrast therapy and staying fit to my ability to not get sick very frequently. Limitless has been inspirational to me in and throughout the process because I'm getting like I said, I'm getting paid to learn and go deep on really interesting topics. And
That's
then,
awesome.
partly because
Best
we were
job
doing
ever.
through the pandemic, I had time to sort of explore those things, like I said, sort of fasting or contrast therapy. And so I was kind of living in parallel to Chris. I was doing it too, which was really cool. The most interesting one and the most kind of satisfying one for me was actually at the beginning of season 2 of Limitless. The first episode is called Brain Power, and Chris sits down with a cognitive scientist, Maya Shankar, and she says to him, listen, you work on your body all the time. You're conscious about what you eat. You're physically active. She's like, the other thing that humans need to do is treat their brain like a muscle. You've got to work out your mind, your brain, keep it strong or lose it, kind of a thing. And so she said, you really endeavor to be a lifelong learner. And he's like, oh, that's really, that's great. You see it in the show. They talk about that early in the episode. And he asked her, he said, well, like what? And she said, well, you could learn, do puzzles like Jen's grandma. Uh, or you can, learn a language. You can learn a musical instrument. And so Chris said, he's like, I think maybe what I'll do is I'll learn to play a musical instrument. And so that was the sort of catalyzer for that episode. And then Chris goes to meet with Ed Sheeran, and they sit down, they're buddies, and they go through Ed's studio, and Ed shows him a piano, a guitar. They even do like a theremin at one point, and then they settle on the drums. And Chris, clearly doesn't know how to play the drums. And Ed's like, this would be really good for you because it's really difficult. It's not only really difficult, but it's going to challenge your brain in a totally different way than learning lines or doing reps, in the gym. So, and then he sets him a challenge. He's like, basically, I know you're a busy dude, but over the course of the next couple months, you should learn to play the drums and then back me up on a song on my tour this coming summer in front of 80,000 people. And
That's
we were like, that's
Whoa.
I mean, what a setup, first and foremost. Like, that is like TV gold. We're
Oh,
like,
yes, yeah.
oh my God, the stakes couldn't be higher, and so on. And so anyway, so Chris embarked on that. And I thought to myself, 100% lifelong learner. I've had, people in my family suffer from dementia. My grandmother had Alzheimer's disease. And so it's sort of in the back of my mind, this is true. I really should work on my brain. I should do something. I should learn something. And I've got 2 kids, a 10-year-old, now 10 and 12, 2 or 3 years ago. So my son was probably about 7.5 or 8 years old. And I turned to him one day and I was like, do you want to learn how to play the drums together like Thor? Well, let's going to go do this thing. And he's like, yeah, whatever, sure. He wasn't that inspired by it. So I went on Facebook Marketplace, and I was like, maybe we should just get a little drum kit. And I found a guy in the next town over who has a
No.
basement. It said, the listing was said, basement full of drums. And so, yeah, his name is Barry. He's this kind of like journeyman drummer dude. He's kind of in his early 70s, gray hair. And we went over there, my son and I, on like a Saturday, went into Barry's basement, and it was just this empty basement, not empty, but like an unfinished basement, but with like 5 or 6 drum kits in it. And Barry
Wow.
buys drums, he refurbs them, and then he sells them, but he also does drum lessons. And then he goes and he plays in a bunch of different bands all over the place. So we bought a drum kit, and on the way out, it was like, Barry, would you ever teach both Hugo, who's my son, and me? Like, would you give drum lessons together? He's like, totally. He's like, you guys come. I've got a drum kit in the corner. You'll get a kit yourself, Bengt, and Hugo's got his own kit. And
Wow.
so we started going once a week to learn drums with Barry. And it was really, really cool. And it was really fucking hard. I got to say, I was like, this is difficult. And my son, it was difficult for him too. He's really young, and, getting there was the hardest part. And then once we started banging around on these drums, it got really fun. And by the end of every session, we would leave and Hugo would say, that was awesome. That was really fun. And we had a great time together. And I said to him, I said, listen, if you stick with this, not only will it be really cool, but I will take you to Chris Hemsworth's concert where he plays with Ed Sheeran. I'll take you to that show. We'll do this together. And so he was like, okay, that'd be really cool. And my daughter was like, I want to go. And I was like, you should go. Like, we should all go. No, we just got to stick with this thing. 6 weeks later, Chris was meant to play with Ed Sheeran at Ed's show in Bucharest, Romania. I was like, why does it got to be in Bucharest? Why couldn't it be in, why couldn't it be in like London or Cleveland? Like, why do I have to fly my kids to Bucharest? But okay, we're in, And so there's a day basically I made good on my promise to my son and my daughter to take them to go see Chris perform, having learned the drums in parallel with Chris. Then Chris goes and he performs in front of 70,000 people in Romania. I take him to their first stadium show. We're sitting in a box with all Chris's buddies and the Newtopia team and so on. And all the cameras are filming the whole experience. And we see Chris down there waiting, and he goes up to play the song, and he goes and he crushes it. And it's so cool. And the kids were really into it. And then Chris came up to the box afterwards and like hung out with us. And the kids got to meet Thor, and my son got to meet the guy who had just learned the drums. And my son was like, he brought his drumsticks to the show and told Chris that he'd been learning to play the drums. And Chris like signed his drumsticks and and it was the coolest thing, right? It was the coolest thing. And Chris, was so kind with them. And afterwards, like, we spent a little bit more time together, and Chris came out and brought both my son and daughter drumsticks that he'd been playing with and using, and gave them sticks and just like hung out and talked with them. And that was like a really powerful thing to have done, in my own life, that was connected to my work, but inspired by my work. And now 2.5 or 3 years on, my son is like madly in love with drums. He is so good at drumming now. He's started to play the bass. He's learning to play the guitar, and it's really taken root in him as like a phenomenal passion that I take some real pride in kind of infecting him with that, but also just inspiring him to go and do that. I'm still playing the drums and everything, and it's been a really cool journey. And the button on it all is when we did the premiere in London. I told the kids, I was like, you guys, we have to go to this premiere and see the final show. And so I flew them out to London, and we went to the premiere, and of course they got to see Chris again. And I got them, all dolled up to go and see sort of what we do in the glitz and the glam at the end of it. But they had never seen a frame of the first episode, and they got to watch that whole thing. And so it was this really full kind of 360 experience, not only for Chris and Nat Geo, but also for me and like my family, and becoming lifelong learners and really taking it to heart.
That's great. That's great. I was going to ask you too,
that.
like, can we expect more episodes of this?
I don't know if I can break news right now. Should I break some news?
Oh,
we're exploring more Limitless.
Oh,
Successful
fun.
for sure.
And maybe I'll just start a rumor. Will Ferrell, huh? That's crazy.
I don't know. What would if Will Ferrell were going to do it? What would Will Ferrell's topic be, Sean?
Oh, I don't even. I'd say the same kind of concept. Like trying to watch Will climb that wall would be funny. But,
put him in a self-help group where he cannot tell a joke.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I'd be serious, man. It's good for you.
Well, I love what Chris said when they asked him to do season 2. He said, when you guys were, had successful season 1 and you were exploring season 2, and he said, absolutely, if there's more science to explore. So clearly there's more science out there to explore.
Yeah.
And hopefully we get to see more of season 3 and more science-based experiments.
What a fun show, though. What a fun show to work on, and just even to watch, and all the fun things. So really cool. Really cool.
Well, I love, because it's not, the title, getting back to the title, we're not limitless. But you want to live your longest, healthiest, happiest life, whatever that is. I think that's the goal. And there's clearly some science to support how to do that. You got to watch the show. You got to subscribe to the hot sheet.
Right.
You got to like it too. And then go see the Avengers. There you go.
Yeah, new Avengers are coming out as well. Most folks know, I think most fans probably know that. But well, you guys, I really appreciate your interest in the show and letting me, inviting me on to sit down and talk through not just Limitless, but our process. It's so rare to get a chance to talk about what we do. Yeah, I get people all the time. They're like, "What does a producer do? What does an executive producer do?" And I'm like, we do we do so much work that you would never know how much work goes into creating these things. So it's a real pleasure to talk about it, to talk about the process, to reminisce about it. And it's you both know it is when you're on a production, it is so full on.
Yeah.
It's more than full time. You're on that thing. There's, as I said, there's a budget and there's a schedule. As soon as you start, it's a ticking clock, and you've got a finite period of time to produce this hopefully this phenomenal piece of work. And so we end up really throwing ourselves and our lives kind of headlong into it. It becomes a huge priority, and I've continued to do that because I love what I do. I love what we do. I love the creative of it all. The end products are always really satisfying. But that story about Limitless in particular with my family is I'm trying to find ways to also live my life within the world of being a producer.
Yeah.
Have it be inspirational and have it continue to learn along the way. And that's a really big thing for me. Why like National Geographic in particular, it's been my home now for 10 years. And one of the reasons I really gravitated toward the brand is not only do I share a lot of the same values with the brand, but what we do in terms of bringing context to the world, supporting, science and exploration all over the planet and adventure and just learning. I get paid to be a learner and a creator at the same time. And so I've kind of got, as hard as it is some days, and all the Zooms and all the meetings with insurance companies and trying to convince people to let David Blaine kiss King Cobras or whatever. It's kind of a dream. It's a dream gig, and we get to do some really fun things, and it's never the same.
Yeah.
So
Well
it
said.
sounds like an amazing journey over there at Nat Geo, and we could do a whole episode on the David Blaine show because that's a fun show too. That's a really fun show.
Yeah.
We'll have to have you come back, and we love talking to you, and we love National Geographic and their commitment to shows that, like you said, are science-based and deep and about the natural world and helping us understand these things. Like, we appreciate Nat Geo so much, and making it fun also while we learn. We love what we do, and we love all the hard work that you guys put into this show to make it happen.